So today we're going to look at importing or bringing models into Maya, and we'll look at this on two different levels. One, the best way to import things, rather either referencing or importing, or what problems you might have with the imported model when you bring it in. So let's first start by setting our project, and this is going to be important because if there are dependencies between files, so if we are referencing in models, so a link will be maintained between files, the project will have to be set up properly. So I know this is my import versus reference is the name of my project because I know it has the workspace.mel file in it. So I'm going to select that and set that as my project. And then I'll go to open scene. I'll bring in sample chimp. Okay, so here's one problem that you might run into, likely not that much anymore, but now that Maya doesn't come bundled with mental ray, if you import something that has mental ray nodes in it, it will throw up these warnings. So the first thing you can do is try and get rid of all mental ray nodes. You can see here's one mental ray library. There might be some hidden ones. So these are all dependency graph things, so things that you can see and manipulate. If you go to, in the outliner, display DAG objects only, we can see all the other things that are hidden here. Lots of hidden stuff, and you can see there are mental ray things and MI things. So I can search for mental, find all those things, and delete them. And then the other one were MI nodes. Oh, maybe that's not going to show up. What are they called? I must have gotten rid of them when I did that. Okay. They must have been dependent on those ones. So now we can go back here. Anyway, so that cleans that up. I'm just going to save the file. Yes, same place. Yes. Okay. So you can see here, this is an imported model. So this is from a medical imaging data set of a chimp skull chimp head where I extracted the skull and the skin. So I have the skin as a separate model, or the soft tissue that goes on top of the skull. So I'm going to import that first of all. So I'll go to File, Import, and then I've got another file that shows up here because opening and importing are different. Opening will only open .ma or .mb files. Importing can import a bunch of different types of files. And the ones that you'll probably most commonly use are OBJ, or object, and FBX. You can see it here, FBX. FBX can contain a lot more information about animation and blend shapes and things like that. OBJ is just sort of a raw model file. And I'll import that. So you might get some warnings because when you're taking in raw data from medical image scanning and things like that, there can sometimes be problems with the geometry. So hopefully it can come in here. Okay, so there we go. Nice chimp face. So this one has actually been cleaned up a little bit already. So I'll show you some things that can happen and that you should try and fix. So if I select this and go to move, you can see the manipulator handle is right there in the middle of the world, and I can move it. Often what will happen when you bring something into Maya is that the model will be way up here. It will probably be, I'm just going to undo all these things. It'll be like the wrong scale. It may be rotated weirdly. And on top of that, the manipulator is probably in the middle of the world. So if I just drag this down here. So, you know, you'll get something weird like this going on, and if we freeze its transformations. So you'll have something weird like this. So the first thing you'll want to do is to probably center the pivot. So you can go to Modify, Center Pivot, puts it in the middle of the object, and then you can try and rotate it and get it to the middle of the world. Now the fastest way to get something into the middle of the world is to go into Move Mode, and rather than snapping it down there, up here we can just type in, this is an absolute transform, so it'll send it to 0, 0, 0 into the middle of the world. Then we can scale it. Usually scanned objects are probably going to be off by some factor of 10. I just did this arbitrarily, but I could reduce the size to 0.1. Hopefully, it gets the right size, and so on. And once you have it rotated, placed in the middle of the world, oriented the way you want it, then you want to go to Modify and freeze its transformation, so it zeroes out all these and ones out the scale. And we're just going to undo all this because I had this done already. Another very common thing that happens when you bring in a model, particularly a scanned model, and so this would be from medical imaging, from CT scans or MRIs, from laser scanning too, or from photogrammetry scanning, you can run into similar problems. The ones that are not just doing surface, so the CT and MRI will cause more problems typically because there are actually internal structures inside the model here too. It's not just a surface scan, and so that can cause some problems. But one thing that often happens, now you can see that this model looks fine. Often it'll come in black, and usually what that means is that the normals are reversed. So I'm putting it into a bad situation here. So mesh display reverse. Okay, still looks fine. Anyway, often it will come in black, or it will not be rendering properly. And you can check it by going to Display, Polygon, Face Normals. And you can see, because I reversed them, these normals are pointing inward. Now it looks like these ones are pointing outward, but these are actually ones that are on the inside of the model and piercing through the surface. So if I select it and go to Mesh Display and reverse, now you can see all the normals are pointing out from the surface, which is what we want. So you want to check that when you bring in your models. I'll go to Display, Polygons, and just turn off the face normals. So this doesn't change the nature of the normals, just whether we can see them or not. Reversing them is under Mesh Display Reverse. I'm going to delete the history on this object. I've got a shortcut for it here, but of course that's under Edit, Delete by Type History. So another thing you typically want to do to these models is clean them up, because a lot of the time they'll have weird geometry in them. And the types of weird geometry can be, let's say this is a polygon triangle here. There could be two overlapped exactly in space. So there'd be two faces attached to these three vertices existing in exactly the same place. Those are called laminar faces. And you can also get something called non-manifold geometry, and that would be something like this, where let's say you've got a plane, and if I select some edges and extrude those out, where you've got this edge has three faces attached to it. 1, 2, 3. That's called non-manifold geometry. Maya hates it. Other programs hate it. You want to get rid of it. And so to get rid of that, because it will stop you from doing other things, you have to go to Mesh, Cleanup, and this will open up an option box here. So clean up matching polygons, yes. Apply to selected objects, or you can do all objects in your scene. So fix by tessellation. So tessellation means to make into triangles. So if you wanted to have triangles everywhere rather than four-sided polygons, you could turn that on, but we already have triangles everywhere. And the reason to do this is that some programs don't like models with faces that have more than four sides, these n-gons, concave faces, faces with holes, non-planar faces. So You could, if there were problems, turn all of these things on to make a clean mesh, but this is important to have the lamina faces, the one I showed in non-manifold geometry, checked off, and it's going to remove this geometry. So if there's an extra face on top of another one, it'll just get rid of it. If there's non-manifold geometry, it'll get rid of that, clean up. That one went quickly because I'd done it already, so I knew it was fine. Another thing that commonly happens, and it's again not happening here, but you'll see the model coming in looking faceted, and that has to do with the hardness or softness of its edges. So when Maya looks at a model, there's a distinct angle between this face and this face, and if it's below a certain threshold, Maya will try and display that smoothly, which is what we're seeing here. You're not really seeing those faces. It's a little lumpy looking in places because this is a scan. It's not a hand-generated model. Okay, it's not showing up on this model, so let's just create a polygon sphere. It's one of those things where I tried it just before. It worked fine. So this polygon sphere, even though it's fairly faceted, when I click away from it, Maya makes it look smooth. But if I select it and go to Mesh Display, Harden Edge, then when I deselect it, you see this. It looks faceted, so it's not smoothing between them. And you get that slight illusion of these two things together will have the illusion of this edge being slightly darker compared to this edge down here, even though these are perfectly flat faces. And so to fix this, which can happen in these models, but it's not really showing up here, you just have to do the opposite of what I just did. Go to Mesh Display and Soften Edge. And then it will go back to this state. And the thing that's happening here is if we go into Display Polygon Vertex Normals, so you've got face normals that poke out from the middle of each face, which shows you the directionality of the surface. And the normals of the vertices indicate the direction that the vertices are pointing. Now, how can a vertex be pointing anywhere? Because it's just an infinitely small point in space. Well, it's looking at the faces around it. And if your edges are softened, the vertex normals are going to average their position based on the face normals of the faces surrounding it. If I select this object and go to Mesh Display, Harden Edge, you can see the vertex normals are now split. And so each face is not being averaged anymore, and so you get a hard edge between the faces based on the surface normals. Okay. Anyway, wasn't showing up on my model, but that will happen and you'll see it. And it doesn't always happen across the whole model. You might get just one area with hardened edges, and if you select the model and soften the edges, it will fix that. So the next thing you might want to do with a model like this is to simplify the geometry a little bit. Now, again, this one I think has already been done. But if we go to Edit Mesh, if you just go to Mesh and Reduce, I'm going to open up the options. You can do this in one of two ways. Either keeping the original on or getting rid of the original, or not keeping the original. And then the reduction method, you can set it by vertex or triangle or percentage. So if I wanted to reduce this by 50%, I'll just do this. And now this can be a costly operation in terms of time. I'm going to keep original off. Actually, I'll turn it on for the first one. So I'm going to reduce. It's working away. Okay, so you can see that you've got the original over here, and then you've got a lower poly version here. And if we go to display, heads up display, poly count, we can see that in the whole scene, we've got 700,000 triangles. That includes, there's the skull in here too. But this thing has 183,000. If I select this one, it's got 367,000. So why did you want to keep the original? Well, there is an option, and this can be a little crashy, but if we go to edit mesh, where is it? Alright, so if you right click over the model that's been reduced and go to paint, go to poly reduced, you can actually paint the vertex weights of the poly reduced. What this means is you could tell it to keep more detail in some areas. So if we want a value of 1 here, so that's going to keep all the detail, I could start painting in here, and it should update the model over here. Look over here, see if there's a change. I did an extra paint stroke by accident on the other eye, so it's calculating that too. There, you saw a slight shift there. So what this allows you to do, and you can see it's costly in terms of the calculations it has to do, but if you wanted to simplify a large object but then retain detail in specific areas, you could paint the value to 1, which is 100%. So it's going to go back and maintain 100% of the original poly count in those regions. If I want to delete the history, I can just delete that thing, or select this object and delete history. If you don't need that functionality, you can go to mesh, reduce, and turn off keep original, and then you won't have the option to paint weights. But once you've done the reduction, it's important to delete the history if you don't need to go back for any reason, because every time you do something new to the model, it's going to have to recalculate that reduction. So you want to get rid of that from the construction history. And so here you can see the higher density polygons in this area where I painted the reduction back to 100%. Okay, so that's importing the model and some of the problems you might run into with this. The other thing to mention is the value of importing versus the value of referencing an object in. So since this is already cleaned up, I'm just going to export this. So I'm going to delete its history, freeze its transformation, and I'm going to go to File, Export Selection. So you can export all in the scene, you can export a selection. And we just want to export a selection. I'll export this as an OBJ. I could also export this as an FBX. I could export it as a Maya file too. But an OBJ will just get rid of all history and weirdness on it, because none of these things are available. So it's actually a good way to clean an object to export it and then re-import it. If you don't see OBJ export or FBX export, then you have to go to Windows, Setting, and remember this because you'll use this all the time. Windows, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager. And this is where, if something is missing from your interface, you have to go look for it here usually. And we have to make sure OBJ export is turned on, and there should be one for FBX export somewhere. FBX Maya, yeah. Click on auto load. So I've got it in there, so I can just go to File, Export Selection. I'll do an OBJ export, and I'll do fixed skin. Okay, I'm just going to delete this thing. So we saw that we could import it, and then again, that's just going to File, Import, Fixed Skin OBJ. Should bring it in nice and clean, no problems. and it becomes part of the file. It's just an object. It's no longer linked to that original file. However, you may want to go to File, Create Reference, and that's another way to bring an object in. So we can just leave all these settings at their defaults, and we'll bring in fixed skin obj, or you could bring in a Maya file. In fact, it's probably better to bring in a Maya file. So let me just try something here. I'm going to save this file. So typically the way you work when you're building an animation or something is you'll have your models in their own files. You won't build them in the actual animation scene. So let's say this is the animation scene, the one with the skull in it. We're going to do some animating. So the skin we probably want to have in its own file. So I just opened a new file. I'm going to set the project to be the same place. And then I will, here I'm going to import that fixed skin object. I'm going to give it a better name here. Let's just call it fixed skin. Okay. And so this is in its own file. I'm going to save it, and I'll call this soft tissue, let's say. And I can put a material on here, so let me just assign a new material. Arnold didn't show up, so I have to go to Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager, and find Arnold. MTOA, Maya to Arnold, loaded. Takes a minute. Let's turn on auto load. So now I can assign a new material. Arnold shader, standard surface, and let's give it a color just so we can see. Okay, it's green. Actually, I'm not going to choose green, and the reason for that is often objects, when they have no shader assigned to them, will show up as green. So anyway, we've got our blue chimp head. I'm going to save this, and now I'm going to open up that recent file, sample chimp. And so when I'm ready to animate, I either want to import that object, that Maya file now. So I could import softtissue.ma, and brings it in. And if we look in the outliner, then we have, where is it? Oh, there it is. So it gives the name of the file and then the name of the model. That's just the naming strategy to avoid problems like if you had Polycube 1 already in this scene and then you imported something called Polycube 1, there would be problems. So it puts the name of the file at the beginning. This can get a little unwieldy after a little while. You can change the name now if you want. But now this model is no longer associated with the file from which it was imported. If you want to delete it, you can just delete it. The other way to get a model in is to go to File, Create Reference, and then we can choose Soft Tissue. And it will bring everything in that's in that file. So if there's more than one object, it's not just bringing that object in, it's bringing everything in the file. And the import does that too. But the difference here is if I open the outliner, here we see the same thing, soft tissue, fixed skin. And it's got the representation of a polygon object, but it also has a little blue diamond shape here. And that indicates that it's a reference. And you can't just delete it. It'll give you a warning saying, if this is a reference, you can't just delete a reference. You have to go into the File, Reference Editor. And if you wanted to get rid of it, you could delete it here. You can unload the reference, you can remove the reference. You can actually delete it somewhere. Yeah, so you could just remove the reference. And also, if you need more than one of these things in, rather than importing it more than once, you can duplicate a reference. And it's best if you have references in your scene to duplicate it this way, rather than going to edit, duplicate. And just because it maintains the link with the original reference file. And you can turn the check marks on and off here to make them come or go. So I'm going to save this file. And so now if we go back into the original chimp head file, sorry, the one that just has this blue skin in it, the soft tissue one, there it is. If we go in and change something about it, like the color of its material, and go back into this one, you can see that the changes will be felt here. Not just the shaders, but if we go back again into the soft tissue file, and let's say I do something like grab some vertices, which I don't really want to do this, so I'm just going to select this and go to, I'll deform it, as I can get rid of this. So let's say I'll just put a lattice on it. Okay, there we go. So if I save this now, then go back, I guess you can understand what's going to happen now. Aha, then this one gets it, but this one doesn't. That's interesting. So what's happening here? Well, if we look in the outliner, what we can see is that the soft tissue 2 fixed skin 1 has a lattice assigned to it, but the lattice is still in the middle of the world. It's because we moved this model before the lattice came in, and so the lattice came in to its proper place, but because this is outside of the lattice, it doesn't affect the model. So if we take the model and zero out its transformations again, now you can see it is in the middle. If we want to move it away, we have to select the geometry, the lattice, and the lattice base, and move it over. So it's a bit of a weird workflow. If we go back into, I'm not going to save this, go back into here and get rid of this lattice. So if you delete a deformer, it gets rid of the effect. I'm going to do a save as just to avoid problem here. I'm going to go back and open this. I'm just saving myself some trouble. So here, now again, if we get rid of the deformer, it gets rid of the effect. But if we actually select this thing and grab some vertices and change the shape of this, and we'll save it, and go back into the place where it's referenced. Now that change will be felt on both of these things because it's integral to the model here, the change that was made. When we added the deformer, it just added a new object, and that new object was in the middle of the world. And when you referenced it in again, it kept it there. Maya didn't realize that this had been moved out of the way. So you have to be aware of that. And to be honest, referencing can be very useful, but it's very finicky in some ways. And it can cause some unexpected problems, especially when you're dealing with deformers and added elements like that. So if you get to a point where you don't want to use references anymore, it's causing more trouble than it's worth if no more changes are going to be made to the actual model in the original file. If you go to the reference editor, you can select on one of the references, that's this one, and you can say reference, file, import objects from reference. And now it's no longer a reference, it's just an actually imported object. Anyway, that's how you get things into Maya. Sorry, it's a little long-winded, but ultimately, you want to remember the workflow that you want to use is to model your things separately in separate files and then bring them together into a central file where you assemble your scene for animation or for doing a still image or whatever. The benefit of referencing is that changes you make in those original child files will be felt in the parent. If you just import those, then you can't make changes to the child that would be felt in multiple parents. So what could happen with referencing that's useful is that if you have 5 scenes with this chimp head in it, if you reference that chimp head in from a central file into all 5 of those scenes and then realize later you have to make a change to the ear, if you make the change to the ear in the central file, that will be propagated through all the main animation files. Importing won't do that. So that's what you have to consider with your workflow. Thanks.